Hey there guys, Noah here, and welcome back to another Vanguard discussion video. Today, it's time to kind of break down and go over the results for the BCS season overall this year. A lot of wonky changes that have happened in between multiple different sets for certain formats, certain cards coming out and making certain decks really good. And I'm just going to give out my thoughts on what I believe for all three formats has a chance at taking the crown this year. Some of the meta picks, some of the anti-meta picks, that's my overall take. Now, do keep in mind throughout all of this that there is a very good chance that we'll get an emergency ban list right before Worlds. So a lot of what I say in today's video is going to be kind of subject to change, depending on what comes out of that potential ban list, because all the BCSs are officially over, to my knowledge. So we can kind of break down and kind of see, okay, what's actually meta, what's actually has a chance of topping, and kind of just go from there. So if you guys enjoy this, be sure to leave a like, comment down below, and sub to the channel. I've got a lot of videos planned for 2023, and I greatly appreciate the support. Without further ado, let's just jump into it. So throughout all of this, I'm going to be putting up, the infographics made by Fuzzy Paradox. Big shout out to him. And kind of just break down what each one of these metas, how they actually played out overall. So starting off for standard, we've got 4 Ava, 3 Prison, 3 Kyrie, 2 Gravidia, 2 Greedon, 2 Letitia, and then a whole bunch of 1-ofs. Out of the 1-ofs, the one I expect to see is Flagberg, because Flagberg is actually really scary. Especially the fact that they have the promo, they have Inlet Pulse for a crazy amount of shenanigans, and I think they have 1 or 2 cards come out of set 7 to make it actually a very good pick going into Worlds. Especially since it just aggroes and just sits there and it goes burr. Like, honestly, it's actually crazy. Another deck that I could actually see popping up here and there definitely is the Gravidia. Gravidia has been very consistent throughout the entirety of the metagame. It got a crap ton of top 8 and top 4s in general, and just the amount of raw aggression, despite it being a 3 attack deck at the moment, it is still disgusting. The fact that it just doubles the triggers means that it's going to be a threat to pretty much any deck going into this format. And especially when we take into consideration that a lot of set 7 stuff may or may not impact how this deck actually functions, I would expect to see a few Gravidia come up here and there. Same thing with Kyrie to a lesser extent. I'm not too familiar with Lyrical Monasterio, so I do apologize in advance. However, I do believe that out of all of the grade 4 decks, Kyrie is probably going to be the one that pops up the most, simply because of the fact of how consistent it actually seems to be. And then, out of all of the decks that are visible here, Ava is going to be there at Worlds. There's no getting around that fact. Ava is, ever since they got that promo, which I've been experimenting with, it has honestly been one of the most bizarre shakeups in the format. Not only because it just sits there and you can essentially guarantee 3 orders by turn 3, but especially in the mirror, it's definitely one of those interesting matchups where it's a give and take situation. And out of any of these decks that are just solo, Ava definitely has a shot at making it and taking the crown. However, one deck that's not on here that is coming out in set 7 that I know for a fact, just based off the Japanese results throughout the WGP, Youthberg. That deck is going to be nasty going into Worlds. It's going to open up a Pandora's box, if you will, because I feel like even set 6 Youthberg was already pretty solid, but the additions that set 7 provides between basically the Aura Geyser Dragon version of, the Youthberg piece, I forget the name, but essentially you look top 2 and then you bot deck stuff. It's honestly really good. It's definitely one of the main contenders, but then you also have the grade 1 support card that basically makes it so that way you still have access to a drive check, and if you combine this with Gust, you basically have 2 drive checks on turn 3 with this, and honestly, it's actually still pretty scary. Out of all the 4 attack decks in the format, Youthberg is definitely going to be one to keep an eye out for, 100%. So out of all of the decks that are coming out of set 7 that are actually going to make a meta shift, that's the one I would highly recommend keeping an eye out for. So up next we got V, and out of all of these tops, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7. 7 of these tops out of the 20-something, regionals that have actually happened. Only 7 of them have not been steammated. I think that shows that out of all the formats currently, this is the one to most likely get an emergency hit. And I'll explain at the very end of the video how I feel like they can emergency hit it, because I made a video a while back saying that they would have to hit it somehow. But truth be told, I think I found a way after discussing with multiple people over at BCS Manhattan how we can actually make this deck somewhat fair. So I'll go into that later. But essentially, assuming that Steammated doesn't get hit, out of all of the decks that have come first place, Glendios is definitely one that, or just any variant of Link Joker, but I would say specifically Glendios, because it can actually put out relatively decent aggression thanks to Glendios' effect, and then also being able to power up the reverse units to actually sit there and go, hey, I'm gonna not only mess up your whole turn, but I'm also gonna keep bashing your face with this vanilla beat stick here. So honestly, I can definitely see it to where, in a vacuum, Link Joker looking kind of strong, specifically Glendios, and I don't think that people won't take Link Joker, but I do expect it to just be Glendios, maybe mixed in with Chaos like we saw with this first place list. But honestly, that's one deck that I definitely see popping up as an anti-meta pick going up against Steam Maiden. Same thing with Luard. Like, Luard is, despite having a somewhat lopsided matchup a little bit here and there, depending on what happens, Luard can actually still pull out the dubs, depending on how quickly they're able to aggro them and just be able to build up enough force markers, especially if they go first and get 3 on the first turn, and then get another 2 or 3 on the second turn. Like, honestly, Luard actually, as in terms of overall aggression and being able to actually dig for its pieces, I think Luard has the most fair matchup going up against Steam Maiden. And that really speaks volumes, because if we look even further into, like, let's say the top 4s, you have some obvious contenders. Again, we have, like, Chaos Messiah, still being relevant. You have Gurgit somewhat popping up here and there. Leopold Reverse being a big one. Astral Poets and just the entirety of Genesis in general has a chance to actually do well in a vacuum. So I definitely think that if the meta doesn't change and that Steam Maiden is just going to be untouched going into Worlds, I think Link Joker is going to be prevalent as an anti-meta pick. Luard is going to try to keep up with it, but ultimately fall short because of the raw advantage the deck can just naturally gain. And then the rest of the decks are kind of iffy, because truth be told, there were a lot of one-ups, but there are also just a lot of, people just bringing in the favorites at that point. And honestly, it's going to be dicey. However, if, let's say for the sake of argument that Steam Maiden does get hit, I expect Luard, I expect Night Rose, I expect Astro Poets being a big one, Jewel Knights, Narukami with Vanquisher definitely is a good meta pick and a good meta call in general. Anj is still going to be relatively good overall. There are a lot of decks within the format that actually have a very solid chance of doing well. So it honestly wouldn't surprise me that if Steam Maiden got hit, we'd have an extremely diverse meta going into Worlds. And I am hoping and I am praying, not just for Bushiroad's sake, but for everyone else who is participating this year, that they do, hit this deck. Because truth be told, there's a lot wrong with this format. And it's all because of fucking Steam Maiden. Finally, we move into Premium. So I'm going to go over all the first places, and then I'll go over like top 4 after that. So 5 Narukami, 4 Gear Chronicle, with a good majority of them being the Mystery Flare Turbo that just got hit. We have 4 Aqua Force, with, I'm assuming, a good majority of them being Ripples that also got hit. 2 Grand Blue, 2 DP, 2 Spikes, 2 Bermuda Triangle, 1 Pale Moon, and then the 1 Genesis. I think it's very apparent, especially if you look into top 4 in particular, Narukami is going to be prevalent. And especially if we'll go into top 8, yeah, that's a lot of Narukami. It's a quarter of the pie chart at that point. But going back specifically for the first places, out of all of these decks, I would definitely expect to see Steam Maiden. Same thing with Aqua Force and Nightmare Dolls because they have Ride Down. All three of those decks have really good Ride Down plays, enough to a point where it's going to make all the other decks in the list actually have to hope and pray it can keep up, truth be told. Especially if some of these decks would go first. It sits there and it goes burr. Especially in Narukami's case, especially if, for whatever reason, they decide to do the Superior Ride to basically just get the one-up on everybody. I definitely think it's something to keep an eye out for. And then the same thing could be said for like a lot of these other decks too. Like Spike Brothers being a big one that I think a lot of people going into Worlds haven't. I could see it actually topping. Just because if you allow them to go into Galley, you're kind of screwed unless you have a G-Guard that can just sit there and deny them their multi-attack. Same thing with Dimension Police. You know, Dimension Police is one of those decks that sits there and it gets big and it can shield break thanks to Linka. If you are caught off guard, Dimension Police just kind of slats. And it really should not be that much of a surprise. But out of all of these decks, let's say for a moment that Narukami does get hit. Let's say that Ride Down at the same time also gets hit going into the World Championships. I think at that point, after those two things are done, Link Joker will come back with a vengeance. Specifically Chaos, because against a large majority of the format, it shuts down Spike Brothers really fucking hard. Nightmare Dolls, it has a somewhat fair matchup due to the fact that they lost Harry. Same thing with Grand Blue, same thing with DI to a lesser extent. A lot of these decks, because they're so rearguard centric, they get punished the moment Chaos Breaker hits the field. And that's not me just being a Chaos Breaker fanboy saying it. There was a likely chance, had it not been for the way how things played out at BCS Duluth, that my Chaos could have easily made top 8 or top 4. Maybe even first place. No, fuck that. Especially with Narukami, no. But in general, I definitely think that Link Joker, specifically Chaos, has a very good shot of making it into the crown if Narukami gets hit. Of course, you also have to worry about Highlander and just Bermuda in general, but that's a small price to pay. And if we want to look a bit further than just Chaos and go into Deleter Messiah, that deck, if they hit Narukami hard enough, let's say they get rid of Impede in a certain way, that deck slaps insanely hard. Because of the fact that you can keep using Cosmic Dawn and Given in the way that it's actually able to combo off of each other, that deck can pull out insane multi-attacking options that are just unprecedented. And honestly, truth be told, I've been working on a list for a little while that kind of combines the two. There is a likely chance, if Narukami gets hit, that somebody's going to bring a Deleter Chaos build, where they use Chaos Breaker Dragon as a means to build up force markers, and then go into the Deleter and do the delete into stride play with the Cosmic Dawn. I could honestly see that, but if we're going to talk, any sort of version of Deleter that's going to be more prevalent, Deleter Messiah is definitely going to be the way to go going into Worlds, assuming that Narukami gets hit. If not, don't expect Link Joker to show up at all. Narukami, if untouched, if unchecked, will get first place. And if it doesn't, I will gladly eat my words, 100%. Initially, when I was making this, I ultimately decided that I was going to talk about Narukami in Premium, but I've already said my case on it in the previous video. But specifically for Steam Maiden, out of everything that needs to get hit before going into Worlds, I think Steam Maiden needs it the most. If I had to choose one thing, that would be two things for Steam Maiden. The first is that Colossus gets banned from both formats. I know that may seem very harsh, but let me explain this in a way that makes sense. Any deck that can easily put out a 2 or more guard restrict with essentially no cost. I mean, you literally place it, bind something from your hand, and you get the guard restrict for the whole turn. Any card that can do that should not be allowed in any format, regardless of the circumstances. The second thing that needs to also get hit at the same time is the grade 1 and 2 that binds itself at the end of battle. Make that a hard once per turn. Errata the card to make it a hard once per turn. Essentially, those two cards combo off of each other insanely well, enough to a point where you can multi-attack like crazy, given enough counterblast. On top of having Colossus, that's a problem. In a vacuum, V Premium should not have that many attacks for a force stack. It just slaps Excel in the face by saying, hi, I know your whole gimmick was, I can sit there and make a lot of attacks because I got more, circles to work with. Well, what if I just didn't do that and still got that many attacks? Okay? You see my dilemma here. Like, I know in a weird sense you have to give him damage to actually allow that to go off in the first place. But truth be told, you can't damage deny the deck. So, honestly, even if you took Colossus out, the errata will also have to come out at the same time. Because otherwise, I guarantee you Steam Maiden will come first. Like, that's without question at this point. I think out of anything that needs to get hit, for all three formats, completely unbiased, Steam Maidens need to go. But yeah, that's my honest take. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Until next time, this is Noah, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye.